All right, welcome everyone to a new episode of the Zero to Play podcast. I'm your host, Carl Leduc, and today I'm joined by Fawzi Mesmar. Fawzi is a veteran game designer, currently head of design at EA Dice, who are the creators of the Battlefield franchise, and he's also a published author of Al Halab on the Art of Game Design, which is the first book on game design to be published in Arabic. He's also the podcast host of The Habibis, a weekly show where three Arabic game developers discuss the week in gaming and media. And Fawzi has won many awards for his work and initiatives. He's spoken at many industry-leading conferences and events, and he's helped publish over 20 titles at some of the biggest studios in the world for over 15 years as a game developer. So I'm honored to have him here. I'm going to be talking to him about his journey into game design, international gaming communities, and any advice that he has for people wanting to make an impact in the world of gaming. So, wow, thank you for joining me today, Fawzi. I really appreciate it.
Man, what an introduction. Thank you very much. You humble me already.
Honestly, that was such a mouthful, and I shortened a lot of things. You've done so much over the last decades that I don't even know if we're going to touch on everything, but there's a few things that stood out to me. And I'm going to talk to you about kind of your story and journey into games and everything. But to start off the podcast, I'd like to kind of go deep into a question that I think echoes the theme of this podcast that I hope to kind of tell the audience. And I think your experience at Dice is really special, and I'd love to know your perspective on first-person shooters and where the genre is kind of leading, and how that genre is being innovated in the future of the genre. So I'm a big fan of first-person shooters, but I feel like it's kind of been similar. Every first-person shooter that comes out is kind of the same, and I just kind of want to take a very forward-thinking approach to like what is the future of the first-person shooter genre from your perspective.
Uh, Very interesting thing. Like you mentioned that now you're experiencing a lot of the first person shooters are coming out nowadays. They feel very similar. I remember like back when like on the very forefront of a first person shooter when it first came out, with like the games of like Wolfenstein 3D and Doom and all of this, and that like when everybody realized that this is something special, it's
Mm,
groundbreaking and all of this. Um, and like the innovation in game development was starting to happen, in which a lot of game developers were starting to get their hands on that type of genre and then start innovating on it. And a lot of people back then used to call every first person shooter a Doom clone.
yeah,
I don't know if you remember that.
yeah, totally.
So it seems like we often like look within innovation and incremental innovation that have been over a short period of time. We're going like, well, that doesn't look that different from the other stuff, does it? But then again, if you look over like a lot of like small incremental innovations that happen over a longer period of time, like for example, if I take Fallout 4 and put that next to Doom, I think you'd
Hmm.
have a hard time calling it a clone, right?
You're
But that
totally
is
right.
like 15 to like we're talking 20 years or more of like a bunch of developers taking a game design concept and kind of like adding a little bit here, a little bit there, improving a little bit on it, and so forth until it became this behemoth of it's even hard to call it a genre per se, because like not every shooter from the first person is necessarily a shooter. Like the example I gave with Fallout, it's basically an RPG. Cyberpunk is a
Yeah,
shooter of some sort. It is very much also an RPG and a bunch of other things.
yeah.
Um, so I think it's like a player facing perspective that is allowing a lot of immersion to come in,
Hmm.
and then game developers have been using it in a lot of variety of different ways to kind of take players on a journey, like put them on that ride and like have them feel that kind of experience. So like though like the core mechanics of like how the mouse and keyboard or like the dual stick shooting works, um like a Doom Eternal run through would be quite different than a match of Battlefield
Hmm.
than would be on doing a couple of quests on Cyberpunk.
Yeah, you're right.
So uh, I'm seeing a lot of like rapid innovation in the genre going forward. What I'm seeing a lot is that uh, uh, shooting has become a mass now, even beyond traditional gaming of PC and console, and it's like expanding over to mobile.
Hmm.
When it's like, when previously people were saying like you can't really play shooters on mobile, there's now, a lot of shooters like have been quite successful on mobile,
Hmm.
using like, mostly touch control and stuff like that. Um, it is a genre that's ever expanding to new audiences and markets, and now new input methods as well. So I think the sky's the limit of where it can go.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because gaming's so tied to technology, and I feel like a lot of comparisons in the last 2 decades of technology being developed and making more realistic, you know, um, films and games kind of thing, where the animations are more realistic, the sounds are more realistic, and I guess my perspective was that that was kind of the only area being innovated on rather than the actual game design or game mechanics. Um, and
Mhm.
and that's something. It's a really interesting, like what you're saying, it's not really a genre, it's more of a player facing way of kind of interacting with an environment. um, and I just, yeah, I wonder if we are going to kind of evolve past this player holding a gun kind of um, mentality. But I think yeah, that we have to look past that, and that's the environment we're comfortable in, and it's the actual story and the kind of gameplay that is where the innovation is happening. um,
Yeah, totally. You got games like Gone Home that took out the gun entirely.
mm,
There's no gun. It's still like utilizing the same perspective. I guess somebody at some point asked similar questions, go like, can we utilize this perspective to create gameplay experiences that are beyond just looking down the gun? Then somebody was like, what if there was no gun?
yeah,
And the experience is just you looking around at stuff, and then stories unfold in front of you, and then boom, another genre kind of
totally.
came out of it. So there's, I think a lot of people have been looking into that from different angles, but just, as with everything, when it comes to analyzing game design, it comes to like distilling what we're seeing in front of us into what kind of experience that we're getting out of it. So it's no longer
Hmm.
just the gun on the screen. It is like, how are the developers using that particular perspective, control scheme, game traversal using the pad to give me that experience as a player, right? And then
Totally.
the sky's the limit.
That's awesome. I'd love to know your perspective on if you feel games can, through game mechanics, evoke emotion. So there's like a debated thing about if games are actually an art form, and because they're very action
Mhm.
based and choice based, if they can
Uh-huh.
actually evoke an emotion to the player. And when you think about examples like The Last of Us and how they're kind of narratively driven, I'd love to know if you think the game mechanics can play a part in evoking an emotion to the player.
Absolutely. So, like, ultimately, like the thing that makes games such a powerful tool to convey not only narrative but evoke emotions within our players is that we have, in video games, you need to make choices. And unlike a TV or a series or a book, when it's like you're just passively receiving, you're just sitting there and getting the information. In
Hmm.
video games, you need to make choices, and oftentimes, the more the choices that you make have a narrative weight or an effect on it, the
Hmm.
more likely that will get you to feel something. So,
Hmm.
like, if you feel that you should have blocked when you shouldn't in a fighting game, you go like, "I should have blocked. It's my fault." There's remorse, there's regret, there's maybe anger or something of the sort, or I should have completely controlled that jump and I didn't. Then I should be better at that controller, so I feel frustrated, whatnot. So games already evoke these kind of emotions within you. But I guess the kind of emotions you're looking for is like beyond the traditional gaming ish emotions of like frustration or but more
Mastery.
like happiness and sadness and
Yeah.
melancholy and like um, and I
Yeah.
think to some extent there are some video games that kind of manage to trigger these kinds of emotions, also through player choice and weight.
Hmm.
And I'll give you an example. There's a game that I highly enjoy, and I talk about the Battle versus game quite a bit. Either Papers, Please or This War of Mine. You can choose any of those two games as an example. In both of these games, like the players' choices are not they have an impact on the gameplay, but also have the narrative of how the story unfolds. So, like in This War of Mine, for example, you'd have some people in your home base, they're sick and they need medicine. And there's two ways you can get this medicine. You can either go to this like very tightly guarded location in which you can get shot, or one of your teammates can get shot in order to get that medicine to save that person.
Mm-hmm.
Or you can go and steal it from those elderly home, defenseless, that they will definitely die without that medicine to rescue your colleague.
Mm-hmm.
Or you can just not do anything and watch them die.
Mm-hmm.
And the game doesn't tell you which way to go. So
Wow.
effectively, they'll make you make a decision, right? And that decision is weighted emotionally on you.
Mm-hmm.
So eventually, when you tell your friends about what you're doing, you go like, "So I went into the place and stole the medicine because I couldn't dare to see that my housemate or whatever in that situation dies." So notice that you probably use the adjective "I"
Mm.
as you're describing how your emotional state went into driving your decisions. So for me, like this game, and there's many others, but I'm using this as an immediate example because it just immediately came to mind as you asked me this question.
Yeah.
Is that they use weighted game decision and weighted decision making within this game to really drive home the narrative effect and make you
Mm.
feel stuff.
Totally.
Uh, and so many games have been like successful in doing this, and that's why like you hear people like, I cried at this game, or like this game made me laugh, or like sometimes when you hear a particular game music, it evokes those emotions in you again, because oftentimes there's a level of emotional investment in your games that you're playing,
Mm-hmm.
and then the weighted decisions that deliver those kinds of experiences to you as well.
Totally. Yeah, it sounds you've made it really clear about how choices are the key point here, because if the player's just going down a linear path, they're probably not necessarily conscious of the implications. There are no consequences to their actions. And that's really interesting. What are your thoughts on experiences like what Netflix did with Bandersnatch, where it's a
Mhm.
film, but they give the player just it's like a choose your own story experience. Do you
Yeah.
think that like, would you consider that a game? And two, would you consider that a good game?
Oh, it's tough question. So first of all, I really liked Bandersnatch. What I liked the most about it is that it gave a lot of people that may have never have played games like that a taste for the first time of what it means to impact the story through decision.
Mm-hmm.
So like they basically gave people a taste of what it means to have player agency,
Mm.
which is what we do in video games almost all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I really liked how that was made. I thought that they could have used more game designers on their team. So
Yeah.
I thought like like the execution of it was good. It's definitely a great first attempt, but I
Mm-hmm.
definitely would have wanted to see a lot more people with game experience kind of deliver that. Like just hire some people from Telltale,
Yeah.
and yeah, they'll give you a lot of advice about how we can deliver that very solid game narrative through player choice and agency.
Totally.
Is it a game? I think there's a very good argument to say that it is.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's definitely blurs that line because you ultimately end up making a decision that completely changes your experience, and that
Yeah.
for me is a game.
Cool.
Or like one of the elements of a game for sure.
Certainly.
Would I like to see more of it? Yes, absolutely. But yeah, get more game people involved.
Yeah. No,
We've
it's
been
cool.
doing this for a while, so we can give you some experience on that.
Absolutely. And I think it's inevitable, just how successful the gaming industry is globally, and how the industry is emerging. Things are becoming more CGI and done in 3D, and um, uh,
Mhm.
like roles in film are now crossing over into gaming. And I think it's inevitable. So I think the film industry is definitely going to lean on the things that the gaming industry are doing so well. So that's cool to see.
Absolutely, they have to. Like, I mean, like, as from revenue point of view, the gaming industry is 3 times movies and games. Movies and music combined.
Yeah,
So from a revenue point of view, we're no longer the niche hobbyist industry.
totally.
We're mainstream and we're here to stay.
Absolutely, and it's just getting bigger and bigger, and no, it's cool. And I think you're in a great position with working at Dice and on the Battlefield franchise, and I'd love to talk to you a little bit more about that. So your role is the head of design, and that's the first time I've
Mhm.
heard that role in the industry, and I'd love to know just in your kind of department, what type of roles, what other designers you manage. So um,
Mhm.
just on such a big scale, as a AAA studio, I'd love to know just how detailed the teams are, if you can share that, obviously. Just like what kind of designers you work with.
Yeah. So I'll tell you what I can share. So like, um, in my role, I'm part of the studio leadership team. So myself, the head of content, the head of technology, and the head of operations, and the production team, we all report into the general manager of the studio. And with our group, we're the leadership team that look after the entirety of everybody in the studio. In my role in particular, I manage all the designers in the studio. So that includes game designers, level designers, UX designers, technical designers, as well as all the creative directors and design directors of the studio. So everybody with design in the title, to some extent, they report to me.
Mhm.
And that would, in fact, make me also responsible for the creative output of the studio. So, like whatever gaming products that we're making, it's my responsibility to make sure that we're delivering from a creative point of view on the utmost level of quality to what our fans and game makers expect. It's a relatively large team, as you said, like it's AAA, and we're a large scale studio. So, like with design, it could be anywhere between, depending on which time of the year you talk to me, it would
Yeah.
be anywhere between 70 to 90 people. So,
Wow. Wow, that's huge. Wow, that's incredible. I work in production, so my job on a day to day is to help manage the kind of different teams. And one question I'd love to know your perspective on is how you manage, or it doesn't necessarily need to be how you manage it at Dice, but what your
mhm.
best what your best case scenario would be for managing the upkeep of a GDD. So there's a lot of challenges when it comes to GDDs, especially with games as a service nowadays, where things are constantly being iterated on. There isn't anymore a once-off document that you hit publish on and then you just send that out to the teams. It's constantly developed, and I think in production that's a big challenge with maintaining a living document. And I'd just love to know your perspective and how you think that could be best done in these days.
Yeah, it's a lot of like designers coming into the industry. They believed in that the Bible. I'm gonna sit there in my corner and think about this game idea, and then I'll write down the Bible, and then the Bible will descend on the development team, and then it will remain unchanged until the game is complete
Yeah.
from these pages. This is obviously nonsense. Like, this will never happen in actuality. The only constant thing about game making is change,
Yeah.
and also the only constant thing about game making is that we are constantly wrong, and we make assumptions that are constantly proven to us to be wrong again and again and again. So like the best approach, like as I give a lot of beginning people coming into the industry, like starting off for the first time, it's like you need to be okay with knowing that you don't know much. And I think the more senior designers you meet are the people that are totally at ease and comfortable with the fact that there's not a lot that I don't know.
Yeah.
And that when they start writing down their design for the first time, they're thinking, most of this is probably wrong. And I'm
Mm.
going to end up changing all of this as I'm writing this. It's never going to make it as it is to the game, right? So the approach of pre-planning everything, then executing to completion just doesn't work in video games especially, but
Mhm.
also doesn't work in software. This is why most companies ended up adapting like agile methodologies
Yeah.
versus like this old waterfall mentality of like the Bible descending from the heavens, and then we all follow it till we release the game.
Yeah.
um, the 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 best approach I found is that we try to achieve what we can over a short period of time. We try to validate our assumptions as best as possible. We
Mhm.
try to make calculated assumptions, and then we try to put validation plans accordingly. Um, and then we look past what did we do right, what could we do differently. We make these iterations and we move forward.
Mhm.
So even as in writing design documents, so first of all, I highly don't recommend you write the one document. There's
Yeah.
going to be several, and depending on the size of the project, might end up in dozens to hundreds. Uh, Maintaining ways to communicate those documents, finding ways to store these documents, and constantly updating them with your findings and all of this.
Yeah.
But it's not just the one gatekeeper of a document. Everybody has access to documents nowadays. It's all about teamwork and people maintaining maintaining the flow of information, especially in this remote development world that we're living in right now.
Hmm.
It gives us even more importance of like maintaining channels of communication and whatnot.
Totally, and I think that that presents the biggest challenge I have as someone in game production is the communication side, and especially like you were just saying, 70 to 90 designers that you're impacting. It's a crazy how important it is to have good tools and a good form of communication. And there's just there's so many solutions that or problems that can be solved, I think, especially with game design, because it goes against my ideal view. I'd love there to be one Bible that comes down and that is the only thing that gets communicated. That would be the best, most seamlessly produced game, in my opinion. But the harsh reality is that it's not like that, and that's my
There's no
my kind
such
of
thing.
ongoing challenge of how is this meant to be boxed up and packaged? How can you budget? How can you plan your milestones properly when you don't know the answers of the questions that you're asking? Um, that's a really interesting thing. Do you have anything to share on that? On just like unanswered questions?
It's like generally like addressing just that is like even with like bigger software companies that release like large scale projects and all of this. Ultimately, it's about if you can't plan that far ahead, then you need to plan to a shorter period of time.
Yeah. No,
So how do
it's
you break down those milestones to smaller chunks and then look at those smaller chunks and then plan properly for those? Also, how do you store data from the past and use that data from the past to plan ahead
yeah. I
and
think
all of that?
Spotify has done an amazing job at just creating a very modular piece of software where different teams can work and iterate on different areas without it affecting the base model of Spotify. And I think that's a great example of a software company that works in the agile methodology that can be reflected in games. That game studios can adopt that similar nature, having separate systems that don't affect each other.
And a lot of game studios do apply that. So like you definitely can see like, many companies I've worked on in the past, they apply agile methodologies, and even like some companies have agile as part of their company values of being agile and moving quickly and responding to the market. And
Hmm.
I think, yeah, that's the way to go, especially for if you're working in like a live service kind of mentality and like you're responding directly to player feedback. You can't go like, oh, we got this feedback that everybody hates this feature. Like, okay, wait 3 years while we finish our milestones, and then we'll come back to the customers and address that. It doesn't work that way.
Yeah.
So you need to constantly look back at what's coming in, what we have to do, what we've done wrong, reiterate, reevaluate, reprioritize, and move on.
Hmm. It makes it very clear why like Steam Early Access is so popular now, because there's just so many unanswered questions. You need to just kind of test the market and see if your idea sticks. And you don't want to bet. You don't want to be like Cyberpunk, for example. I mean, that's probably not a perfect example, but they were just in development for so long that expectations, the market, and everything just grows and changes over time. It's an interesting challenge to try and solve.
But I bet even like companies like CD Projekt Red, they don't also release a project in the blind. They
Mm,
most definitely have
mm,
invited players to test and play their games many times. You don't release a game like Cyberpunk is a great game. Like them, I've played it and quite enjoyed it. Um, uh, a great product that comes together like this. You don't just go like, I'm gonna stay away somewhere, not ask anybody and not test it, and then boom, it's released and it's perfect. It
yeah,
doesn't work that way. Like a project that is so well put together in many ways,
yeah,
especially design wise,
yeah,
has had a bunch of eyeballs on it
yeah,
over the course of the year. Plus, like you get hundreds of veteran developers working on it as well, who've also seen a whole bunch of games and they're feedbacking each other the entire time and all of that. So, like as you work on any game, you probably will talk to the designer, to the artist, like, yeah, I thought of this, I thought of that. You guys are constantly talking, I
yeah,
imagine. And it's like that, like regardless of the scale, there's always people go like, I thought about the game and I thought we should do this or we should do that. And people are having this conversation the entire time. So
yeah. You're right. It's not like the people making the game are the market at the end of the day, and the thoughts and experiences that they have are exactly
they're
what
definitely a
probably
segment
echo.
of the
Yeah,
market for
yeah,
sure.
yeah. No, that's awesome. That's cool. I'd love to take a sidestep now and talk a bit more about gaming as a community. So you've,
Mhm.
throughout your experience, you've worked at Gameloft, King, Atlas. Now you're at Dice. You've worked in
Mhm.
Japan, New Zealand, Germany, Jordan. I saw you're in Sweden
Yes,
now. You worked in Saudi
yes,
Arabia.
yes,
Um,
yes.
and you've spoken about the kind of gaming communities in those different countries. And I'd just love to know if there's a few bits of knowledge you can share about what the different gaming communities have been like in those different countries, and what you feel is a good representation of a strong community. Like, what is it that those countries have that make a strong gaming community?
Hmm. Well, so it's like every one of those have like a quite a different condition when it comes to like how where it is when it comes to its current game development scene. So like as I started off, and also like where I was also back. So the timing of when I was there also plays a factor. So like
True.
starting up in the Middle East. So I'm originally from Jordan. So starting up in the Middle East, in Jordan and Saudi Arabia 15 years or more ago, that that there wasn't a lot going on when it comes to the game development scene, especially before the smartphone explosions and all of this. So like
Mm,
um, the the market penetration was not that high. It was still considered to be a niche kind of
hmm.
market from a consumer point of view, and then it will make sense that there wasn't a lot of game development happening as well.
Yeah.
And also like in a market in which like spending 80 to 70 to 80 bucks on a video game is like half a month's salary.
Yeah.
It wouldn't make sense for that to become like a thriving business
Yeah.
at that
Wow.
time.
Yeah.
But things changed quite a bit. So like us starting out, like we grew up in the arcades, we had our Ataris and whatnot. So there was people playing video games and all of this, but there wasn't much of a development scene. That has now grown, right? So
Hmm.
now we have a lot of game companies that's starting up in the region. We have a lot of publishers and all of this. So we
Nice.
have the making of a strong scene. We're still waiting for that big gaming company to kind of release that title that kind of brings that region to the forefront. So like
Mm,
I often use and I really admire like what happens. So like we were talking about Cyberpunk, so just do that. We talked a bunch of games coming in from Poland, so I might as well use that as an example.
yeah.
So like CD Projekt Red has been doing what they're doing for quite a long time, and those guys have like managed to establish um, multiple franchises now, successful franchises with like a wide global appeal.
Hmm.
And like the existence of such a studio kind of like presented some kind of a breakthrough within the country of like there's a very solid strong studio that's achieved worldwide success,
Hmm.
and then you'd get people that work on these titles, create some games, and then they branch out and they create their own studio,
Yeah.
or other people that branch out and they create their own studio. Like there's this giant studio in the middle that had this massive success, and then a bunch of people kind of like spiral out of it,
Yeah.
and then they create their own thing. So like this War of Mine that I use as an example is a Polish game, and now there's like Techland. There's all sorts of different studios within Poland that's just creating fantastic video games.
Mm,
Um, all like coming out of that, this one big kind of hub that started off coming out of it, and then started to do a lot more of that. Some some countries have been fortunate to have studios like this for quite a long time, and Dice for me was a studio that was always like that. Like prior to joining Dice, I used to play Dice games when I was still starting out in the Middle East, and I hadn't never would have imagined that I'd end up working here, let alone leading the Battlefield franchise. But a studio like Dice, and if you've seen like a lot of the big studios within Sweden or Europe, and you look at the founders or the co-founders, you'd see that a lot of them were ex-Dicers.
yeah.
Like there's this institute that's basically been in Stockholm for now over 20 years,
Yeah.
making large scale successful video games. And then
Yeah.
you'd have people, the veterans that developed games alongside, and then they like step out and they start their own thing. And then now um, that's one thing. And like and Sweden has been in the industry for quite some time, in the same way as Japan. So this has happened enough over the course of 20, 30 years that the US or Japan or Sweden, for example, have such a thriving gaming industry because of that. and with some other regions like the Middle East is still in its very early stages, and some regions like New Zealand was in intermediately, so somewhere in between, right?
Mm-hmm.
So when you have like a lot of successful studios in Australia, and in New Zealand, kind of like hitting big successes, but they're still waiting for that massive IP to kind of
Absolutely.
demolish. They're like really make that mark and create that hub that
Yeah.
kind of spiral out all the other studios. But you can also see it within Australia and New Zealand scene. Like have a lot of people are coming in from THQ, from Team Bondi, from like the OG crew that like really started making like big games, Blue Tongue and like those people.
Mm-hmm.
And then I spiral out into like a lot of like interesting independent studios that are making all sorts of cool stuff. So
Yeah, it's interesting how gaming is segmented with the kind of PC console, the VR, and kind of different like new platform area, and then mobile, which is booming. The New Zealand gaming industry is very much, I think, over 60s, maybe 70% of the revenue annually comes from mobile games. And there's a lot of small, 5 to 15 people studios in New Zealand that have one or two good titles on mobile that bring them enough revenue to like run their studio, which is really interesting to see. There was also a conversation about like Supercell in Finland, and how they got government support at a really early stage, I believe, and that helped them just kind of they just gambled on the just on the market at a very early stage, and that's shown huge success for them. And that's kind of what we're hoping to get by the New Zealand government in gaming here is some money pushed into some of these little studios that can create a big hit that can work overseas. That's
absolutely,
yeah.
we're always standing on the shoulder of giants, right? So like the Finnish game development scene, as used as an example, is obviously always been very admirable. There's a lot of like people have been making amazing games from the beginning, but also like keep in mind that Finland used to rule the world when it comes to like mobile technology, right?
Mm,
So it would make sense that the same country that kind of was revolutionized mobile use would also revolutionize mobile game use as well,
mm. Yeah, interesting.
right?
Yeah, it's
And like
important to look
there's a
at
lot of
the
this experience here, like the government is kind of aware of that technology. They've been invested. It has brought up a lot of growth for the country. So of course they'll be amongst the pioneers and
yeah.
to look into like that mobile stuff really worked in the past. Maybe we should do more mobile stuff.
Totally. What I'm hearing is that New Zealand, the government should invest in a Lord of the Rings game developed in New Zealand. That seems to be the path that that we need to go to get that big hit. No, but it's an
Well,
interesting conversation.
the government definitely invested quite a bit, I imagine, like following the success of Lord of the
Yeah,
Rings in the movie business. That's for sure.
absolutely. Yeah, yeah,
Right?
and it's an interesting discussion because did it come after it was already a proven success, or did it arrive before? I suppose when a big company like Warner Brothers gets behind Peter Jackson, the government can't really ignore it at that stage. So it's like investment
Yeah.
is important. Yeah, interesting. I'd love to talk about like what you were talking about before about growing up in Jordan. So a few years ago you released Al Khalab, the book on game design for the
Mm.
Arabic community. I'd love to know what that process was like and why you created that book. There's a lot of game designers in the world. What led you to want to put that out into the world?
So that was a little bit personal for me. So like I wanted to give back, to where I came from. I wanted to like to be able to give like others the opportunity to be able to pick up information and material and learn about game design without having to learn another language. I was fortunate enough to have gotten like education, and I spoke okay English and managed to get my hands on material from overseas, and I like read whatever I could about game design, and but I still like made a lot of mistakes and fumbled quite a bit until I've learned the hard way because I couldn't have access to a lot of
Mm,
information early on, and just managed to get whatever I wanted to get. And so it was really like a way to kind of try to give back to the community where I'm from, and like help people. Like I wrote in traditional Arabic, so like people from 28 different countries. Arabic is like the fifth most spoken language in the world,
yeah.
and we don't have that much material available about that particular topic in that language. So I just want people to have access to that knowledge, let's say, without having to learn a second language. So I try to make it as accessible as possible, to make it delivered if possible, and even ended up recording the entire content of that book later on. It's like 400-page textbook. It's just a one-on-one of game
Wow.
design. I ended up recording the entire content of that book in a week-long crash course that I did with the guys on idrak.org, which is a non-for-profit organization that aims to just provide education for everybody for free. And my courses there also available for free. So basically, I
Wow.
just want people to learn as much as possible. So since then, I think over 15,000 people have completed the course, which
Wow.
is mind-blowing for me, to be honest. Like I have 15,000 people interested in game development also were okay to listen to me blab about games for a week.
Yeah,
Is like a good sign of endurance, if not
absolutely.
anything else.
Is that 15th, is that whole, was that whole course recorded in Arabic as well?
It was, yes, indeed.
Wow, that's amazing. I think what you've done for the community, it's the kind of thing that you probably won't see results on for decades, but you could be inspiring kids growing up and pursuing a career, and that's actually, I think, rather than a big studio being born in a country in the Middle East and then spitting off all these other people building studios, I think it's actually the content and the inspiration and the stories like you're sharing are what create because you need someone to be passionate about the gaming industry before they go seeking a job in the gaming industry. So I think you've done an amazing job at kind of attacking it at its core and really helping build the industry. So I think that's an awesome initiative that you've done.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's really cool.
Thank you very much. I mean, like, it's been over 3 years since the book was launched, and still, like, every week or so, I get the picture from, like, a kid like posing with the book and sending me a thank you message, or some person tweeting at me and going like, "I've read your book twice, and I'm doing this and that," and like it wants to debate a topic. And when that
Wow.
happened, like, I mean, not even when like the long run, as you mentioned, happened. Like when I get a message like this, I'll be like, "Right, so um, uh, everything I've done so far is worth it."
Wow.
Like yeah, it's very humbling, and yeah, I'm very thankful to be
That's
able
so
to
cool.
do that and help others.
Are you wanting to write another book? Was that a once-off thing and you're never going to go near publishing again? How was that process and would you do it again?
um Not, I don't want to commit myself to something or like too much, but I have been dabbling with the idea. So like maybe this time is in English though. So I've been thinking a lot
Cool.
about ideas and originality and where they come from, and the concepts of originality and how that applies to the game making process.
Cool.
I'm doing a lot of research on this topic, and it's yeah, I've been quite fascinated by it for quite some time. So
I love it.
maybe there's a book there someday. Who knows?
Yeah, no, those are my favorite books on gaming at the moment. Just the things that talk about the art and the like core, like being as close to the human condition as gaming can be, and just talking about gaming as a medium and as an art form. Yeah, if you write a book in English, I'll definitely pick it up. Otherwise,
Thanks, man.
I'll try learn Arabic and then pick up your other book. You haven't translated that book to English?
No, no, not yet, not yet. That's the thing. Like I've always think like there's a lot like there's people that are way better than I am who've wrote way better books in English.
Yeah,
So I'm like, if you ask me like if it was in English and ask me which book should I read about game design, mine would be the last one I would recommend.
yeah,
So I think there's a lot of like really like a lot more skilled and talented people that have wrote a lot of information around that already. I just wanted to cover really game design 101 for in a different language, from from a native tongue
totally. I wouldn't
perspective as
sell
well.
yourself short though. I think getting to produce a book and to have those ideas sitting in your head for so long proves something. And I think your stories and your perspective is valuable to the industry as a whole. I think a lot of people would be interested in listening to just your perspective and your journey into game design from your neck of the woods. One question I want to ask is for all the game
Thank you.
developers out there making games, how can they create games that are more accessible to the communities in the Middle East? Like what advice would you give to them, or like struggles that game developers have that you think can be solved?
Struggles that game developers outside of the Middle East make for
Yeah.
games to be consumed over there. So like definitely if you're interested in going into that market and making those games more accessible, do some research about the market, what kind of themes are interesting over there, what kind of genres are popular within that region. Look into the cultural aspects and the localization of the products.
Hmm.
We get that a lot in a lot of games in which like the Arabic is usually from right to left, and a lot of software,
Yeah.
even Photoshop and stuff like that. If you don't have the language settings kind of correct, it just like screws it up, and it just looks like a jumbled mess.
Yeah.
Uh, like stuff like that. Give a little bit of time to get like the localization teams to kind of like work on proper Arabic localization, and spend the time to go through the QA and make sure that that text is kind of um, legible in the right way and all of this. And also like the subject matter, and I'm happy to see that this is kind of changing. There used to be a period of time in which like the Arabs were the enemy in a lot of games.
Yeah.
Like I guess we're like like the when it comes to modern warfare, then you need to like drop in some kind of desert area and just bomb a whole
Yeah.
bunch of Arabs. Um, and I'm happy to see the industry like moving past that, and
Yeah.
to avoid this the cartoonish representation of reality into something a little bit more human.
That's a good point.
So stuff like that. I think take into consideration like presenting elements of there's a lot of beauty in Arabic heritage that I don't think has been surfaced much within video games. I know the Assassin's Creed series has definitely done a lot of awesome stuff
Oh, cool.
with their games, and like you can see like when an Assassin's Creed game or Origin, like an Origins, like the one of the most latest one, but even like the earliest ones that had you like right from Damascus to Cairo and stuff like that.
Hmm.
You can see like how much untapped potential there within that region of stuff to do.
Mm.
I know like the architecture in Journey was inspired by the architecture of Yemen, of how
Gotcha.
those buildings are coming
Beautiful.
across. So there's a lot of like there's a lot of beauty within that region that just hasn't surfaced
Hmm.
or been used
Yeah.
in a way that can get the most effect of it.
No, that's
So
great.
yeah, talk to more Arab game developers, get their insights on that, see what how much they can inject into your scene. Diverse teams create diverse games that create fresh and interesting perspectives.
Love that. That's a quotable moment there. Um, yeah, I'd love to go back to just talking about game design and what your advice would be to anyone entering into the industry and wanting to get a role as a game designer in a company. Like what was your path to getting that as a career option? Like how did you get that role, and what advice would you give now, 15 years later, for someone wanting to
Hmm.
start off?
So I studied computer science at university, and while I was studying it, I met a whole bunch of people that were interested in making games, and then the nine of us just got together and we started making a Game Boy Advance game.
Cool.
So we made an indie studio, and we just started to make a game for a game's sake. And then I was, they brought me in also to write the music for the game initially.
Nice.
I was in a band, and they were like, "We want to bring you in to write music and all of this stuff." But then they're like, "You're such a wise ass all the time. Why don't you also do the game design
Yeah.
for the game as well? Since you're talking about game design for the entire time." So I ended up like doing the games and the music and the game design for that game, and been doing game design since.
Oh, cool.
But I guess if I could summarize that to like a practical advice that can get you through the door, um, I can summarize that into maybe to five major topics, especially when I go to game design. If you want to, get an experience in games, make games. So
Hmm.
find any way you can make game with. You can like download engines and for free now. Download engines, make your own games, mod existing games, and become a very popular modder or whatever.
Hmm.
Um, use level editors in existing games and make games using that.
Mm,
Make board games. Create content for games. Make Mario levels on Mario Maker.
yeah.
Produce gaming content is the way for you to become a game designer. You learn how to make games by making them. The first, this is the path that worked for me. The
Hmm.
path I know that worked for a lot of other people. I definitely recommend that. Another path is to study game development at a game development school. And usually those school or study game design at the game development school. So you graduate and you know a bit of art, a bit of programming, and a bit of design. So
Hmm.
you're basically an independent studio on your own, and you've made a whole bunch of games while you're studying. And a lot of those schools they have really good connections with their local gaming studios.
Hmm.
So if you're a good student and you make some good games while you're a student, chances are they'll hook you up. And if you hook up with their internship, that's a good way for you to start. Another way is to start through the testing route. So QA testing, land a job there, and then work your way through design into the company. So a bunch of there. A surefire way to get a job in the games industry, you can learn programming. Everybody needs programmers. We will always need programmers. So become a good programmer, learn programming, land a job programming games somewhere, and then transition into game design from there. Is also viable.
Hmm. That's awesome. That's all great advice, and a lot of people that I can think of, myself going from QA, just I had no previous experience in games, and I walked into Gameloft and asked for an internship. I just asked for an opportunity, and I came back. They came back with an internship as a QA tester. So that was an amazing opportunity that's led to a whole career ahead of me. So I'm grateful for that opportunity. Um, and yeah, I've known programmers that have just kind of naturally fallen into the design role because they have such a strong grasp of the systems of the game that when there's an opportunity, that's just kind of a natural shift where that programmer kind of needs to sit at a game design table now because they're the ones with the highest level of information and the longest time working on those systems. So that makes sense. And yeah, now institutions having game design courses, I think that's a new path that 10 years ago was very hard to find. The course curriculums weren't really hand in hand with the studios that existed, but it does seem to be something that's now becoming more popular. Yeah, you're right. Studios are now forming relationships with local institutions. That's all really great advice, and just being actionable of making games. I love that piece of advice of making games in Mario Maker and just creating levels, because at its core that's making a side-scrolling game. You can add different game design elements and create a completely different experience in the kind of format. And that's another shift that I'd love to know your thoughts on is game platforms that are emerging. So I had a chat a few weeks ago with a guy named Taylor Hurst, who's an investor in America, and he was talking about Roblox and how they're building a platform for games. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and I'd love to know if you see that as like an avenue of the future of game design or game development, where platforms are created where creating games are becoming easier and designing games are becoming a lot easier for
Mm-hmm.
people like me with no programming experience to create. Do you believe in that future, and do you see that as something that's happening soon?
I see a lot of so like there's a lot of positive indications that deals toward that. Time and time again in the industry, every time we gave the audience the tools to create, they make amazing stuff.
Yeah.
so so I think we can all like be rest assured that now giving the audience the tools to create stuff is a good idea because a lot of like the genre breaking moments that came in the games industry over the past decade, or no, I think probably 2 decades, probably came from the audience. Like with the rise of MOBAs, for example, as a mod,
Mm-hmm.
to now the rise of battle royale. I'm talking
Mm.
about like two big moments coming completely from the community
Mm-hmm.
of a game ramping up to create something that is like a $1 billion business, if not more.
Totally. Yeah, no, you're right. The modding community is an interesting place to look at. Have you had any experience in like modding communities and that whole niche of game design?
Yeah, so I dabbled a bunch with that as well, starting up, of course. The first game we made, we basically hacked a bunch of commercial GBA units to make the game on there, and like we've done so much sprite manipulation on some of the stuff to make games on it. But also within our current company, guys, we have strong roots in modding. In Sweden, there's a very strong modding scene. And
Cool.
there's a bunch of designers in my team, like they came in from the modding communities, like they've either like created custom Quake maps at some point, or they did some mods on Unreal or a variety of different games that they quite enjoyed back in the day. So
That's cool.
the roots are deep in modding within the industry.
Yeah, it's something that probably isn't advertised because it's kind of synonymous with hacking, and you're breaking into things and doing things that developers probably don't want you doing. But it seems like something that when it's adopted right by a game, it can create some really fascinating things. Like Rocketworks, the company that I work for, the founder Dean Hall, he's the one who created the DayZ mod for Arma 3, and that was an
Huge.
interesting time in just in game development and design. Is a company that puts the tools out there to create different versions of a game, and that was an example of a whole new experience that was created from just someone messing around. So that's another interesting area that's evolving.
A lot of like game development or game design started with someone going like, "Oh, wouldn't it be cool if I did this?" And then
Yeah,
they just went ahead and did it, right? So,
that's cool.
messing around is the name of the game.
Awesome. One of the last questions I want to ask you before we end the podcast is: I saw on your website that you used to be in esports. You're a retired esports player, and I want to ask you about that and find out what the context is behind that.
It's a bit of a joke, but like a long time ago now, I used to play a lot of StarCraft, and I played in a bunch of tournaments. So I played in World Cyber Games back in I don't know at this point, maybe 10 years ago or something of this. No, more. A long time ago, I played a bunch of StarCraft Brood War. I think I got to third national champion in Brood War. I played Zerg. So I
Wow,
played a bunch of StarCraft. Yeah, I played
nice.
some Street Fighter tournaments here and there. But yeah, no, I'm rubbish now. So that's why there's an emphasis on the retired part
Yeah,
because
that's cool. I
I
mean, but
wasn't.
yeah, go for it.
I was like, I wasn't that good then. I'm definitely not that good now. So
Yeah, it's cool though because it speaks on a whole emerging industry that is, in my mind, going to become bigger than any sports and institution. It's
Mm.
going to, because it's technology based, because it's online. It's just going to completely shatter any record. It already has with streaming records and things.
Shattered a whole bunch of records when it comes to prize money already with like the
Prize
Dota
money,
International.
viewership, even just the whole nature
Yeah.
of esports is fascinating. But anyway, we won't get into that today. Maybe the next podcast we
it's
do
so,
we
so
can.
super wonderful. Yeah. It's wonderful for me to see how much you've grown. Considering like when were playing, we used to just try to find replays anywhere and download them to just watch what the pros were doing.
Yeah,
Because viewing something live as it happens wasn't a thing. A lot of these tournaments were not recorded, but we'll just try to get our hands on the replays and forums and like study and practice and upload replays, and yeah, that's what esports was.
yeah, absolutely.
To see what it is now is just mind blowing for me.
Yeah, I had a chat with Gene Chorba on the podcast, who is the senior developer relations at Riot Games, and we had a good chat
Mm.
about APIs and the future of games really putting out that information. So coaches that can pull all the data from a gameplay, a tournament or something, and really pinpoint the moments that can be improved on, and just like that whole area is being innovated on an esports level. And then there's the whole content side, so creating the tools for people to make their own montages and their own replays, as in a way that should be made easy to the person on the other side, and that's a fascinating conversation as well. But no, that's all we kind of have time for. I really appreciate you coming on, Fawzi, and just giving your time and your advice. You gave tons of advice for people wanting to enter into the industry, where the industry is going in your mind, and I'm just honored that you decided to give me the time today to talk about your experience, because it's hugely inspirational for me, and I know it's going to make an impact to a lot of others listening as well.
You humble me, man. Thank you very much. They're very kind.
So if anyone's interested in following you, where's the best place for them to get in touch with you or to reach out to you if they have any questions? This is your time.
Absolutely. You can find me on Twitter at Fawzi Mesmar. You can also reach out to me and email me. I have a website. It's fawzi.zone. So just go check it out. That's Fawzi, FAWZI.zone.
Awesome, man. That's cool. And I look forward to hearing your next book announcement, if you ever do, or if you ever translate your Al Halab into English. I'd love to read it. And yeah, thank you for coming on, and I look forward to keeping in touch with your journey and what the Battlefield franchise ends up doing on the next iteration.
Awesome. Thank you very much for having me. It was a lot of fun. Appreciate it.
Cheers. See you later.